It can be frustrating as a photographer having raw files which are so flat and uninspiring and really don't reflect what you witnessed and experienced out in the field. In the video now, I want to show you some quick processing tips to bring out the best of your images that you capture. I'm in Photoshop here, which is popped up ACR, Adobe Camera Raw. You can be in Lightroom as well. Same thing really. What I'm going to quickly do to this one is just crop this in a touch. I just don't like all that foreground I got. And then you'll probably notice there's a big raindrop right there. Don't want to focus on that too much for our lesson, but we'll just get rid of them out of the way. Alright, so in regards to color, the first thing that I'll often do and recommend is in the color profile, change that to landscape. You see straight away, it just gives the colors a boost, and it even changes a little bit of the tones. The dark tones get a touch brighter. If you do that off the start, then you're off and running, and if you save it for the end, it could go overboard. So do that first and foremost. The next thing I'll do in regards to color is in the basic tab, looking on the right hand side here, depending on the scene, the temperature and tint I'll change quite a lot. Now this scene here, it's a forest scene, waterfall scene. There's beautiful blues. There's even some subtle greens in the river, especially in this area here. Blue and green are going to work really well together. So I think I'll first and foremost bring out the greens by dialing the tint back a little bit to the left. But now the temperature, getting a cooler feel in this image, I think is going to work quite nice. What I may end up doing is warming up the sky up here with the highlights, that diffused light, and that'll just offset everything with a nice bit of warm contrast. So cooling everything down now, and this is all global adjustments. So when I do this, the whole image is getting that adjustment made. Next thing in regards to color, specifically the vibrance and saturation. Vibrance works on our midtones, saturation is on the shadows and highlights. You'll often find that's why they go overboard quite quickly, particularly in landscape photos, because we will often have a lot of shadows and highlights. So I'll find that most of the time I'm dialing up the vibrance anywhere from 10 to 30 depending on the image. The saturation itself could sit on 0, it could be 5, it could be 10. Again, depends on the image. This one here, we might even just leave it there, to be honest. Now, I just want to bring up the exposure. We're quite dark in this scene, so I'm going to bring that up a little bit, just so we've got a bit more visibility in our dark tones. Now that I have done that, I feel like the eye not quite flowing to the waterfall as effectively because of this lower right. So I'm just going to push K to get an adjustment brush. This is the main tool that I use in my workflow. So it's K on the keyboard, or you can click on the masking button and just select the brush. What I'm going to do is actually bring down the midtones, the dark midtones on this brush, and run that through. So using curves on a brush is just a very powerful way to locally, so we're not working globally now, we're working locally, adjust tones in specific areas. So I've just done a slight S-curve here where I've increased the whites, the bright tones, but pulled down those darks. The whole point of doing this is to allow the eye to effectively flow to the waterfall instead of getting stuck on that foreground. Now I'm actually going to push K for another brush, and this time I'm going to bring up the exposure a touch, not too much, and then I'm going to go down to the dehaze and actually rehaze by going to the left. What this is going to do is just brighten things up back here and also just emphasize that atmosphere, that epic atmosphere that we had just around like so. Alright, now going back to the world of color, I'm going to close the basic tab, and the other main tool that I suggest you check out is the color grading. So when we open this up, we have midtones, shadows, and highlights that we can apply a color hue to. Now, every photo is going to be different. An image like this, there's a lot of midtones in this image, a lot of shadows as well, and we can see that in our histogram. If I wanted to make the forest greener, I could move this outer circle into a green hue around, say here, greeny blue, and then the inner circle, I want to click and drag that out to apply the actual saturation. I'm going to hold shift when I do that, so the color doesn't slip around, and now it's fixed on that. So you can see we're getting a real green punch in the image. Now, to be honest, it's probably going a bit overboard. Might dull that. You can see here, the midtones are definitely hitting our fog up there. I don't really want that. So I'm actually going to not apply any midtone color at all. The other one is the shadows. I'll often cool shadows down. We've got that going on already, but I'll just show you for argument's sake, dragging that into the blue, And I like that. I think that's giving it a nice, just a touch cooler. What I might do now, try and warm the highlights. We'll see if that hits the atmosphere, the fog up the top there. Yes, it's subtle, but I think that's nice. It's just giving us a hint of warmth up here. And like I said earlier, it's a nice natural contrast. Warm highlights, cool shadows. It's kind of what you get in golden hour. It's very pleasing on the eye, just that natural contrast. I'll dial that along. Now this is all subtle, these adjustments, and that's really the best way to do your processing really, is to keep it subtle, so it looks more natural. I'm just going to have a play of warming the mids as well. Yeah, so you can see that's definitely hitting that upper left as well when we warm that up. So we might leave that around there. So let's just do a before and after. If I push P on the keyboard, that's where we were. That's where we're at. Another way to give colors a bit of a lift, specifically like on these trees here, I'll do this a lot, just about every photo to be honest, but particularly in a forest scene, is I will again get the adjustment brush and I'll bring up the whites. Bringing up the whites is going to boost any natural light like luminosity, and you'll see that it just gives those greens a nice lift at the same time. And you're probably thinking, hang on, that's not doing anything. Again, subtlety is key. So I ran that brush all the way through that back area. I'm avoiding the waterfall because I don't want to make that any brighter, and I'm doing it in the back to pull the eye through the scene. So as we dial up the whites, see that difference there? Just think of it like dodging. In the film days, dodging, brightening, essentially. So dodging that. I'm going to do a new one, and on this one I might do highlights and whites and just hit some of the river as well. Again, predominantly back here where I want to lead the eye through the scene. Push all that. Alright, now one final way that I want to show you to just add color is again using the brush, and locally you can also on the edge of the brush change the temperature and the tint. So I might bring some yellow in and a touch of magenta, and just in this top left where we were doing our color grading, warming up there as well. Now I think that's probably gone overboard. I'll dial it back a little bit like so. Now let's just do the before and after again. That's where we were. That's where we're at. Sometimes I'll often zoom out of the image as well just to get a different perspective on it. I like to look at the images smaller instead of being so close to them. One last way is just adjusting color. The curves. And by doing the curves, you'll see the colors get a little more pronounced as well. So I've gone into the global curves, pulling the darks down, but then pulling the lights up. So this is a mid-tone contrast adjustment. So look at the histogram. I'm going to reset these. The darks go down, so the mid-tones, dark mid-tones, just a little bit. I don't want to go too far. This is already quite dark in those mids, but now the lights go up and you're just getting that pop of contrast in the mid-tones though. Very subtle S-curve. I like to do it on the sliders here, so you can be really subtle when you're doing it. Of course, you can also go into the color mixer, and this is where you can work on the hue, the saturation and luminance on individual colors. So for example, we might want to jump on the greens, warm them up by sliding to the left. You can see the trees there, going to the right to cool them down. Very effective. Same as our yellows, working on those, the blues. There's a lot of blues in this image, so we can really go in and fine tune the look of them. And then, like I said, you can do the same with the saturation and then the luminance, the actual brightness value of them. So if we pulled up the greens, see those trees back there lifting again. Now, I got to admit, I don't use the color mixer too much because that's working globally. I much prefer to do the local adjustments, as you've seen with the adjustment brush. That way I can go in and just hit the exact area that I want to work on. The last thing I think I would do with this image is I've got a new brush here. I'll darken, bring the highlights down and a little exposure, just this left side, just to keep the eye pushed in towards the waterfall there and not drifting off to the edges too much. So there we go. Now personally, I will let this marinate, so it'd be a draft. The way I do that is just by pushing done initially. You'll see now that here in Adobe Camera Raw, it's got the edit applied. So it's like a Lightroom catalog. It just creates a memory essentially. Then when I'm ready, I'll reopen the file and it's all there. It can still be worked on and tweaked Once I feel like I'm content with the final result, that's where I'll continue opening up into the main part of Photoshop and then save it as a PSD file. Alright, let's do one more example now and reapply everything that we just went over. If I open this up, camera raw, straight away, landscape profile instantly has brought out a lot of blue in this image. I'm actually going to warm it up now. I think it's a touch too blue. Now, straight away, it's a very flat scene, isn't it? This is an aerial perspective, so I've shot this at a relatively fast shutter speed. Now, all I need to do is just bring up the exposure. And I like to often look at my histogram as a guideline. So at the moment, this is predominantly a mid-tone. If I now start to increase the whites, the white is light. So look at it, pull the histogram to the white. We're really getting a great pop of luminance. That's going to lift the image out, make it jump off the screen, especially if you do a print. So I'm making sure my histogram is not like that anymore. We've got a lot of variance in the tones. I'm going to actually go down to the dehaze now and globally dehaze this one. Now, I don't often do this, but because this is repetitious colors and textures, it's going to work fine. So I don't mind working globally on something quite heavy like dehaze. Look at the histogram now. So it's pulling the dark mids to the left. It's also subtly saturating the blue as well. So I might go about 10 on there. And jumping into the vibrance and saturation, not going to go overboard. So I think it's already got quite a lot of blue in there. What I would like to do though is go down to the color grading and let's start to get a bit of contrast in color because we have the blue, but look in here, there's a warmer hue in there, but it's just getting a little lost, isn't it? So we're going to jump on the highlights. Let's just see how this goes initially. A little bit of warmth, big difference, okay? It's not as blue anymore. And this will create more depth because you have color separation. We could go really dark blue on the shadows, and then the mids, I'm curious to maybe warm those up partially as well. Yeah, something like that. Let's jump into the curves now and further just get some contrast in the histogram in the file, bringing the lights up a bit more, and then I'll bring the darks back. So working on our mids, see what that's doing there, and really pop them out. Let's do before and after. What I would like to do is, I'm just going to do a subtle crop. I don't like cropping, but especially something like this, it's hard to fine tune the composition when you're literally hovering in the air. Now I'm going to create a further sense of depth. I'm going to create in this area, which is closest to the viewer, more contrast, and I'll do that on the curves again on the brush, bringing that down, the darks. See what that's doing? Just dropping. Now, I'm only doing the darks, so that way anything with light in there still remains bright. If we did exposure, for example, everything gets dark. It doesn't look right. So I just drop the darks, dark mids, probably back here, about there. See that? And if we wanted, we could lift the light a touch more as well. What I'm going to do now on the far left, that's further away from the viewer. I'm going to rehaze there to create the illusion of depth. So just along the top, just in the background, essentially like so. So just dropping off all that contrast that we applied earlier. See the histogram shifting a little bit for that area. So now we have a bit of a gradient leading the eye from the dark flowing towards the light. I'm still curious if we just amplify some of that warming of the highlights as well. Around here. Now an image like this, it's just so subjective. You can take this in so many different directions, and like I said, letting it marinate. Just come back later with fresh eyes, revisit the files several times before you really commit to it, and that's why I like to just let them marinate, sit there as a draft. I might drop those blues off a touch like that. Now histogram still has a big gap there. We don't quite have that final bright tone. I'm going to bring up the exposure a little bit and some more whites just to start to push that across. All right, there we go. Now again, have we gone too far? I really like the look. I think it looks really effective and powerful. There it is. That really shows it off there. I'd let this sit now and then, revisit before I really commit to the final result. But hopefully that really has given you some food for thought on how to make the most out of your raw files, how to use the curves and those color adjustments so you're not sitting there with flat images anymore.